In 123 BC, the main Han army under the command of Grand General Wei Qing marched out beyond the northern border of the Han Empire and was plunged into an unprecedented crisis. Wei Qing had dispatched 6 columns with the aim of hunting down and destroying the main force of the Xiongnu Chanyu. Yet one of the Han vanguard units ran into tens of thousands of the Chanyu's elite cavalry deep in the desert. After a day of ferocious fighting, the entire Han unit collapsed. Worse still, the general leading this force was himself a surrendered Xiongnu who had switched allegiance to the Han. At the critical moment, he took his remaining troops and went back over to the Xiongnu. Another Han column was annihilated, its commander fleeing back alone. The atmosphere inside the main camp froze solid. An expeditionary force of over 100,000 men was deep in the field. A detached column had been destroyed, a general had defected, and the other divisions had made barely any headway. Then another piece of news came in. His 17-year-old nephew had vanished. The boy's name was Huo Qubing. Huo Qubing was not only the nephew of Wei Qing, but also the nephew of the empress. He had grown up in the imperial palace, and Emperor Wu had practically watched the boy grow up. In the emperor's eyes, Huo Qubing was not like other commanders. He was both a subject and a junior member of the family. Emperor Wu saw something dangerously sharp in this teenager. So on this campaign, he gave Huo Qubing a nominal title and allotted him 800 horsemen. It was a personal gamble by the emperor on the lad. No experience of independent command, no military achievements worth mentioning. He had simply been brought along by his uncle to see the world. And now, with the main army mauled and a general turned traitor, this boy in whom the emperor had placed so much hope had taken his 800 riders away from the main body of the army and utterly disappeared. Days passed. When Huo Qubing reappeared at the Han encampment, he brought with him 2,028 Xiongnu heads. During those lost days, this 17-year-old had taken his 800 horsemen, struck out alone on a raid covering hundreds of miles, driven straight into the Xiongnu heartland, killed a senior official who was the Chanyu's grandfather figure, captured the Chanyu's uncle alive, and taken several dozen prisoners of ministerial rank. In the entire southern Gobi campaign, the Han army, at grievous cost, had managed no more than about 10,000 enemy killed. A boy on his first deployment, with just 800 men, had delivered a result equal to 1/5 of the main army's total haul when the dispatch reached Chang'an. Emperor Wu invented an entirely new title of nobility, one that had never existed before. He named it Champion Marquis, Guanjunho. This was not an ordinary marquisate rank. It was a title tailor-made for one man, unprecedented in history, destined to become legend. Spring 121 BC. Barely 2 years had passed since that astonishing debut in the battle south of the Gobi. Huo Qubing was now 19. He was the champion Marquis, and Emperor Wu had bestowed on him yet another title never seen before, General of the Agile Cavalry, making him the second highest-ranking commander in the Han army. That year, the emperor gave him independent command of 10,000 elite cavalry and a single objective, the Hexi Corridor. Before Huo Qubing took to the battlefield, the way the Han fought the Xiongnu was already undergoing a profound transformation. The old generation of generals, men like Li Guang, still clung to the traditional tactics of infantry and war chariots, formed into defensive blocks. Against the swift-moving Xiongnu cavalry that came and went like the wind, this approach was ponderous and impotent. Wei Qing had already launched a revolution against such outdated methods. But even Wei Qing, when commanding large army groups, could never fully jettison the burden of logistics. He still needed enormous baggage trains, and in pivotal battles, he would still use armored war wagons to form a defensive laager. The 10,000 elite riders Huo Qubing led out this time had not a single infantryman with them. He discarded the whole concept of a supply line with an almost mad audacity. His logistical logic was summed up in a single principle: live off the enemy. Wherever he attacked, that was where he would seize provisions. His army would solve the problem of eating on the spot, inside the enemy's own tribes. He turned his force into a pure attack group with no encumbrances, no rear area, nothing but speed and killing power. Speed and shock were his keys to victory. After setting out from the Han Empire's northwestern border, Huo Qubing forced his army on a series of rapid marches over 6 consecutive days. Striking at a speed the Xiongnu could not possibly react to, he smashed through 5 Xiongnu client kingdoms in quick succession. This was not a single pitched battle. It was a sequence of assaults so swift you could barely draw breath. His cavalry cut through the enemy like a red-hot knife through butter, crossing the Langjuxu Mountains, slashing across the entire Hexi Corridor. Every attack launched from a direction the Xiongnu never anticipated. The most sacred treasure of Xiongnu, the golden statue for heaven worship, a totem at the heart of the tribe's faith, was seized and carried back to Chang'an as a trophy of war. A single cavalry force of 10,000 men had driven deep, more than 1,000 miles behind enemy lines, destroyed 5 kingdoms in 6 days, and killed or captured more than 8,000 of the enemy. Of course, the price was extraordinarily steep. Historical records state that the army's strength was reduced by 7/10. This was a Pyrrhic victory in the truest sense. From that casualty figure, you can infer the sheer intensity of the campaign. This was the logic of lightning warfare, 2,000 years before the term existed, played out in the Hexi Corridor. Huo Qubing proved that attack did not require a rear. His force had almost no time to recover. It is likely that beneath the Gaolan Mountains, they fought an exceptionally savage melee at close quarters with the Xiongnu main force. With the men already physically exhausted, they used maximum intensity hand-to-hand combat to tear a hole right through the Xiongnu lines. When the dispatch reached Chang'an, Emperor Wu's reaction was once again one of shock and awe, and he saw further than anyone. He saw that the Xiongnu's ruling order in the Hexi region had already been fractured. So his decision was not to quit while he was ahead. It was to seize the moment and keep striking. After securing victory in the first Hexi Corridor campaign, the Han army did not withdraw to the interior. To ensure the suddenness of the next phase of the offensive, they remained in the border region for a short rest and refit, waiting for replacements, reinforcements and supplies, and prepared to set out again as soon as summer arrived. Summer 121 BC. Only a few months had passed since the end of the previous Hexi campaign. Huo Qubing received Emperor Wu's second order. Keep fighting, and this time smash your way right through the Hexi Corridor. The Emperor's plan was crystal clear. Huo Qubing and another veteran general would each lead a large army and set out separately, with a rendezvous point deep in Xiongnu territory, forming a gigantic pincer movement designed to encircle and annihilate the main Xiongnu forces in the corridor. At the same time, 2 other Han armies would strike out from the empire's northeastern border to tie down the Xiongnu's eastern Tuki king in the east and prevent him from sending reinforcements westward. 4 fronts unrolling simultaneously, it was the largest coordinated operation the empire had ever mounted. And then the plan almost entirely fell apart. Start with the eastern front. 4,000 cavalry went in first, with a further 10,000 supposed to follow. But the follow-up force moved too slowly. The vanguard collided head-on with the full strength of the eastern Tuki king's 40,000-strong cavalry. 4,000 against 40,000. They were encircled for 2 full days. More than half the Han troops died. By the time the relief force finally arrived, the Xiongnu had already withdrawn. Now look at the main axis of attack. After departing from Bidi Commandery, Huo Qubing pierced deep into the Xiongnu heartland at extreme speed. He crossed the Yellow River, traversed the Helan Mountains, cut through the Tengger Desert and the Badain Jaran Desert, swung around to Juyan Marsh, an area of desert lakes in what is today the Aegean Banner of Inner Mongolia, and then drove south, straight into the Kilian Mountains. This route was almost inconceivable 2,000 years ago. A wide, sweeping, outflanking march of over 2,000 miles, completely divorced from any base of support, the entire journey passing through desert and mountain. At the very moment the Xiongnu, following their usual logic, were trying to guess from which direction the Han might appear, Huo Qubing had already burst out from behind them. But there was a problem. He was entirely alone. According to the plan, another army should have already reached the agreed meeting point and linked up with him to form a pincer. Yet when Huo Qubing arrived, there was nothing there. The historical record for that army consists of just two characters: lost the way. The normal choice for a normal man would be to withdraw. A lone army, no reinforcements, no supply line, more than 2,000 miles of desert at your back, and in front of you the Xiongnu main force still intact. Huo Qubing's choice was attack. He launched a devastating frontal assault on the Xiongnu in the upper reaches of the Ruo Shui River, beneath the Kilian Mountains. This was not a stealth raid. This was a head-on battle of annihilation. When the fighting ended, the Han army had killed or captured a total of 30,200 men. Among the prisoners were the Chanyu's vassal king Q2. 2,500 men surrendered. 5 minor Xiongnu kings were taken alive, along with their mothers, the Chanyu's principal consort, and 59 princes. They also captured 63 senior officials, including prime ministers, generals, danghu, and duwei. Xiongnu military power in the Hexi Corridor virtually ceased to exist after this battle. By the time the other army that was supposed to link up with him finally reappeared, the campaign was already over. Of the 4 great columns, 3 had either been mauled in bitter fighting or got hopelessly lost. Only one man had crossed more than 1,000 miles of desert, arrived on time, fought a pitched battle of annihilation, and single-handedly fulfilled the entire operational plan. That man was the 19-year-old Huo Qubing. From that moment on, the Xiongnu lost the Kilian Mountains and the Yanji Mountains forever. A lament spread across the steppe. We have lost our Kilian Mountains. Our herds can thrive no more. We have lost our Yanji Mountains. Our women have lost their color. After the complete occupation of the regions south of the Gobi and the Hexi Corridor, the Xiongnu had already suffered devastating blows. But Emperor Wu would not stop, and neither would Huo Qubing. In 119 BC, the emperor poured the full might of the empire into a final decisive war against the Xiongnu. This was the Battle of Mobei, the campaign deep north of the Gobi Desert. Huo Qubing was now 21. Barely 4 years had passed since that first deployment south of the Gobi, the battle that had made him a Marquis. Emperor Wu's dispositions were on an unprecedented scale. Grand General Wei Qing and General of the Agile Cavalry, Huo Qubing, would each lead 50,000 elite horsemen, advancing deep north of the desert in 2 separate columns, one to the west and one to the east. Behind them, the Han Empire mobilized hundreds of thousands of infantry and civilian laborers to transport grain and fodder and maintain the supply lines. Emperor Wu even requisitioned horses from the imperial stables to ensure the frontline cavalry had enough mounts. This was a campaign on which the fate of the empire was staked. 2 armies, 2 targets. Wei Qing's target was the main force of the Xiongnu Chanyu. Huo Qubing, setting out from Dai Commandery, had as his target the forces of the Eastern Tuki King, the most powerful military element on the steppe, apart from the Chanyu's own horde. Wei Qing advanced more than 1,000 miles beyond the frontier, crossed the desert, and discovered that the Chanyu's main army was already arrayed in battle formation, waiting for him. Wei Qing had won, but his victory came at a grievous cost. The Chanyu had escaped. The encirclement had failed. The Han army lost huge numbers of war horses and soldiers. Total enemy casualties for the campaign were no more than about 10,000. An even heavier blow was that the veteran general Li Guang, blamed after the battle for losing his way, took his own life in shame and fury. The Western army had won, but it was battered and bleeding now. Look at Huo Qubing. Once he had marched beyond the frontier, he did exactly what he always did, and ordered his entire army to advance at full speed, completely abandoning the rear. This was no ordinary cavalry raid. Huo Qubing took his 50,000 horsemen and drove hard north for over 2,000 miles, crossing the desert, surmounting the Liho Mountains, fording the Gonglu River, and thrusting directly into the Xiongnu heartland. What does 2,000 miles mean in this context? His entire force had completely cut loose from its logistical supply lines. With no maps to guide him and no friendly forces to support him, he relied entirely on scouts and his own instinct, searching the vast desert for a nomadic army equally famed for its mobility. And pursuing it, he found the main force of the Eastern Tukey king and fought a full-scale head-on cavalry battle of decision. The historical annals do not describe the details of the battle. They simply provide the precise outcome: 70,443 enemies killed or captured. What does that figure represent? The entire Eastern Tukey king's domain was, for all practical purposes, wiped off the map. The Eastern Tukey king himself abandoned his army and fled, barely escaping with his life. Han losses in this campaign were roughly 3/10, heavy but nowhere near crippling. To fight a battle of annihilation that virtually wipes out the enemy's main force with a loss ratio better than 1:5, in the history of desert warfare, this was unprecedented. But even this was not the most important thing. Huo Qubing did not stop. He hunted down and mopped up the remnants of the Eastern Tukey king's forces, and then he ascended the Xiongnu's sacred mountain, the Mount Langjuxu. Mount Langjuxu, in the area of the Kentiya Mountains in modern-day Mongolia, was the spiritual center where the Xiongnu conducted their grand ceremonies of heaven worship. It was the equivalent of a sacred temple where a people's deepest beliefs converged. In the faith system of the steppe nomads, heaven was the highest deity. Heaven worship was the most solemn of rituals, and the mountain where the ceremony was held was the channel through which heaven spoke to the human world. The historical record says that he first building an altar on Mount Langjuxu to worship heaven, then moving to Mount Guyan to worship earth, completing the full paired rite. Then he pressed on to the Han-Hai Lake Baikal, as we know it today, and only at that point did his soldiers' blades turn homeward. Huo Qubing was no emperor, but the land he had conquered was not old imperial territory, and the mountain he had climbed was the sacred mountain of the enemy. He stood there and announced to heaven and earth, "This place is now the territory of the great Han in terms of law and political protocol." The act was profoundly controversial. And what was Emperor Wu's reaction? Not fury, not probing questions. Instead, he personally proclaimed the fact in an imperial edict. He did not punish Huo Qubing. He wrote the event into the official record of the empire. What does that mean? This was not an act of usurpation. It was a declaration sanctioned by Emperor Wu himself. Your victory is my victory. Your sacrifice to heaven is the great Han's sacrifice to heaven. Over the 2 millennia that followed, when China's most famous generals, poets, and historians spoke of the ultimate achievement of a soldier, they would all point to the same phrase: Feng Langjuxu, the ritual proclamation of victory at Mount Langjuxu. It is not an official rank. It is not a title of nobility. It is higher than all of those. It means you struck into the deepest heart of the enemy's territory. It means you planted your own banner at the very center of the enemy's faith. You did not fight a defensive action at the frontier. You turned the enemy's sacred mountain into your own altar. In all of Chinese history, the number of generals who have achieved something on the scale of Langjuxu can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Huo Qubing was the first, and he remains the only one to have done it at such a young age. This was the last battle Huo Qubing would leave to Chinese history. After the Mobei campaign, the Xiongnu fled far away, and there was no royal court south of the Gobi Desert. 2 years later, in 117 BC, the young man who had reshaped the map of the world suddenly fell ill and died. He was only 24. From his first deployment at 17 to his death at 24, his military career spanned a mere 7 years. But in those 7 years, together with Wei Qing and other great generals of his generation, he had pushed the borders of the Han Empire 1,000 miles to the north and fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of the entire Asian continent. And then he was dead. Not killed on the battlefield, not wrapped in a horse's hide. For the cause of his death, the history books give us only a single word. He died. No further explanation. From another perspective, the fall of Huo Qubing carries a strange kind of dramatic completeness in Chinese history. Commanders whose military achievements overshadowed their sovereigns often met ugly ends. When Huo Qubing died, Emperor Wu was at the very peak of his powers, and the Han Empire's appetite for expansion was at its zenith. If Huo Qubing had lived into his 30s or 40s, what would he have faced? An aging and paranoid emperor, a host of political rivals watching his every move, a political purge once the empire's expansion had reached its limits. History provides no answer, but we have all seen that script play out far too many times. Emperor Wu had a tomb built for him, shaped like the Qilian Mountains. But Sima Qian, in his Sing Records of the Grand Historian, left behind another kind of record. It does not deny Huo Qubing's military achievements, it merely lets us see another side of that glittering blade. First, he was not a general who cherished his soldiers. The Sing records sing a blunt. Emperor Wu gave him dozens of carts loaded with fine food and wine. When he could not finish it, he would rather leave it by the roadside to rot than share it with his starving soldiers. During the Deep North expedition to Mobei, when his soldiers were so famished they could not stand, he was busy organizing Sing Kuju Sing, a kind of kickball game. In Huo Qubing's tactical DNA, the option of sharing the hardships of the men simply did not exist. Second, he personally killed one of his own subordinates during a royal hunt at the Gangquan Palace. Right before the eyes of Emperor Wu, he shot dead a military officer who had previously beaten up his uncle Wei Qing over a private grudge. That officer was Li Gan, the son of the veteran general Li Guang. This was not the battlefield execution of a deserter. It was killing a man who had been enfeoffed as a Marquis in the presence of the emperor, motivated by a personal vendetta. Under Han law, this was a capital crime, but Emperor Wu covered it up for him. The emperor told everyone that Li Gan had been killed by a deer's antlers. The raw, naked protection offered by the highest power in the land was recorded by Sima Qian with icy precision. So the full portrait of Huo Qubing looks like this: a once-in-a-generation military genius and the ultimate political favorite. His ruthlessness was not just for the enemy, it extended to his own side. He was not benevolent and self-effacing like Wei Qing, nor did he share the hardships of the common soldiers like Li Guang. He was a pure, high-efficiency engine of war. The scribes could not deny his achievements. But neither did they intend to wipe the bloodstains away. And it is precisely this that gives history its most profound tension. It does not hand us a perfect hero, it hands us a real man,